The FBI Most Wanted Fugitives list was launched in 1950. It's featured 526 people they considered dangerous criminals, and 490 of them since have been captured or located. Only a small handful have managed to evade capture and have been removed from the list, but those who have disappeared leave behind plenty of unanswered questions and a strange mystery. Henry Randolph Mitchell was one of the first criminals ever to be put on the FBI's Most Wanted list. Compared to other criminals who would later find themselves featured on the list, Mitchell's crime was relatively tame. According to ancestry records, Mitchell was born at the tail end of the 19th century in Kentucky. Little is known about his life, but Kentucky would become one of the 4 states this criminal would be convicted in before 1948. Mitchell had a gambling problem. Due to his short height, he was known as Little Mitch at the tracks that he would frequent. Unfortunately for him, most trips to the track involved losing money, and he racked up significant debts. In order to pay off those debts and feed his gambling addiction, Mitchell turned to a life of crime. The earliest record of his criminal career dates back to 1924, and he spent the next 20 years in and out of prison. He was convicted in Kentucky, Georgia, New York, and Florida for bank robberies, forgery, and crimes involving illegal substances. While a newspaper clipping from 1953 claimed he matched wits with law enforcement, he rarely got away from his crimes and spent as much time in prison as he did out of it for most of his career. Then came the crime that he would become infamous for. It was January 21st, 1948, and Mitchell had not long been released from prison. He and an accomplice robbed a Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation bank in Willstone, Florida. The pair fled the scene with more than $10,000. It didn't take long for Mitchell's accomplice to be caught, and Mitchell was named as the second robber. But this time, Little Mitch would evade capture. Mitchell was still a fugitive when the FBI released its very first Most Wanted list. He was 4th on the list. One by one, the other criminals on the list, including gangsters and people who had taken lives, were captured, but Mitchell remained at large. It was as if he had disappeared off the face of the planet. Finally, in 1958, the charges against him were dropped. Too much time had passed. Mitchell made history as the first person to be removed from the list without capture or evidence that he was no longer alive. What happened to Mitchell remains a mystery. There were no sightings of him after the 1948 bank robbery, leading authorities to believe he's no longer alive. Given his history, it also seems unlikely he would have been able to stay out of trouble for the rest of his life. Some theorize that he owed money to the wrong person, which ultimately cost him his life. It's likely anyone who knew the answer to this strange mystery has since passed away, leaving us only with unanswered questions. David Daniel Keegan disappeared without a trace on June 21st, 1954. Despite an extensive manhunt for the missing fugitive, he was never found, and what happened to him remains a mystery. Keegan was a World War II veteran who had struggled to adapt to civilian life. He had a minor criminal record, primarily for things like selling liquor without a license. He ran a cafe, which apparently operated more like a tavern, and had an alcohol dependency issue. He later moved to Sioux County, Iowa, on the Missouri River. There, he was alleged to have run a house of ill repute and again fell into trouble with the law. But these were all very minor crimes, and nobody could have expected he would be responsible for a crime serious enough to put him on the FBI's Most Wanted list. Money problems meant Keegan would try his hand at a more serious crime, though. He'd heard that a farmer named William Edwards kept all of his money in a safe on his property. Apparently, William was distrustful of banks and would rather have kept this money where he could keep an eye on it. Keegan plotted with 2 other men, Maurice Walsh and Harold Henderson, to commit the robbery. On the evening of February 22nd, the three men put on ski masks and broke into the home, which was shared by William, his sister, and their cousin. The criminals tried to force William to open the safe. William fought back with a stove poker, and one of the criminals fired his weapon. A bullet struck William in the chest. When his sister tried to get him help, another criminal tore the phone wire from the wall. They again demanded William open the safe, but he refused again, so they took his life. William's sister and cousin were bound and left in the bedroom, while the three men fled the scene with the safe. The safe was later found in South Dakota, meaning it had crossed state lines, and the FBI got involved. Police soon caught up with Walsh and Henderson. Both men testified that Keegan was the one who had taken William's life. Keegan and about $6,000 of William's money was never found, and what happened to him remains a mystery. Those who knew him claimed he wouldn't have started a new life without contacting his mother, and it seems strange that someone with no experience with serious crime would be able to evade the FBI for so long. Some believe Walsh and Henderson took Keegan's life, and his body was dumped in the river. He was taken off the FBI's most wanted list after federal charges were dropped, and the truth about what really happened to this one-time petty criminal remains a mystery. Simeon Mellich is a dangerous criminal wanted by the FBI for a variety of crimes. Unlike other fugitives on this list, though, the FBI knows pretty much exactly where he is. Mellich is a Ukrainian-born Russian mobster who's been involved in everything from defrauding Jews trying to leave the Soviet Union for the US to global arms sales. He's believed to be worth $10 billion and has friends in high places. He's been described as the boss of bosses, and while most of his network seems to have been based in Eastern Europe and Russia, his crimes have impacted people around the world. Mellich's criminal career began in the 1980s when he defrauded Jewish families trying to leave the USSR. He would claim he would sell their furniture for them, only to pocket the money himself. It was a relatively small crime, especially compared to what he would later be known for, but one that earned him 2 stints in prison. After being released, he took advantage of the chaotic fall of the Soviet Union, rising up the ranks in crime families who found he was extremely good at money laundering. His business ventures soon expanded around the world, smuggling weapons, illegal substances, and other things into Russia. He was known as the Brainy Don due to his economics degree and his talent for laundering, but he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. The brutality of his attacks on rivals meant most rival gangs quietly left an area as he arrived, not trying to put up a fight. In the 1990s, the FBI began investigating him. They knew he was a major player in the illegal arms trades, as well as other major crimes that would impact America. But trying to get him for any of those would prove impossible. Tax evasion was another matter, though, and in 2008, he was finally arrested in Moscow for the crime. However, bail was posted, and after that, authorities wouldn't be able to get their hands on him again. But authorities do know exactly where he is. He and his family continue to live in Moscow, free of any worry of being caught, even though he featured on the FBI's most wanted list. He was eventually removed from the list, but the US doesn't have an extradition treaty with Russia, and his friends in the Russian government mean he's unlikely to ever be handed over to face real justice for his crimes. Taylor Morris Tieford was a dangerous criminal who was added to the FBI's most wanted list in 1968. Tieford was responsible for taking the lives of at least 2 women, including his own grandmother, and injuring 2 other people. He was last seen in 1969, leaving a hotel in California, where he had just taken the life of an unidentified woman. What happened after he left that hotel is an unsolved mystery. Tieford was raised by his grandparents and walked with a limp after contracting polio. He had a history of violent crime, and in 1967, he had recently been paroled from prison where he had been serving time for a 1957 crime. It was about midnight on July 18th when Tiford's sister, Sherry McIntosh, ran out of her grandmother's home in Tennessee, calling for help. She told a passerby that her brother was trying to take her life after an argument had broken out. What was described as a hail of bullets followed, striking the passerby and Sherry. When a police officer arrived, he too was attacked, but thankfully, no bullets actually hit him. Tiford fled for the high country, leading to a police manhunt. Inside the house, authorities found the grandmother's body and the bodies of 2 of her cats. What caused Tiford to turn on the woman who had raised him is just another puzzling part of this mystery. Tiford wasn't found, and the following year, he was added to the FBI's most wanted list, but apparently that didn't cause him to keep his head down. In October of 1969, staff at a hotel in Oakland, California, went into a room to find the body of a young woman. The attack on her had been particularly disturbing. It was discovered she'd come to the hotel the day before with the man who would later be identified as Tiford. Tiford was eventually charged with taking her life in 1972. That same year, Tiford was dismissed from the most wanted list after federal charges were dropped. There were still plenty of unanswered questions surrounding this case, though. His 1969 victim is still without her identity. Why he turned on his grandmother in such a fashion is also a mystery, and some have even claimed that he may have been responsible for other crimes. It's unlikely we'll find answers to the last 2 questions unless Tiford himself is ever found. Frederick Tudo was on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list for more than 14 years before he was finally removed. He wasn't captured though, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding his disappearance have made him infamous. Tudo had a criminal record that dated back to when he was just 16 years old, and the seriousness of his crimes had only gotten worse and worse as time went on. He was known to be violent and earned the alias The Angel from his criminal associates. After being in and out of prison throughout the 1930s and 40s, he was imprisoned for taking the life of a Philadelphia man and sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. Tudo didn't plan on spending that long in jail, however. He broke out of prison 3 times. On the first occasion, he was quickly recaptured, but the third attempt was a success. On the first 2 occasions, he was quickly recaptured, but the third attempt was a success. On February 10, 1947, Tudo and 4 other prisoners dressed as guards to escape Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. The men went their separate ways after the escape, and within 5 years, all but 2 were caught. The only ones to remain at large were Tudo and a bank robber named Willie the Actor Sutton. The jailbreak was enough to earn both men places on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Sutton was the 11th criminal to be added to the list, while Tudo became the 14th when he was added. Both also continued their lives of crime after escaping prison. Sutton continued to rob banks in New York, and Tudo was part of the mob. In February of 1952, Sutton was recognized by a man named Arnold Schuster, who was riding the subway. Arnold contacted authorities and Sutton was arrested in Brooklyn while trying to fix a dead battery in his car. Arnold became something of a minor celebrity as police advertised that they'd caught this wanted criminal. Arnold appeared for radio interviews and was largely admired by the public. But of course, he also attracted negative attention and received dozens of threatening letters. One such letter read, quote, "You won't have long to live. Willie has friends." The letter would turn out to be accurate. Less than a month after Sutton was captured, someone attacked Arnold. He was found with 4 bullet wounds in a pattern that indicated a mob hit. Tudo was the prime suspect. The circumstantial evidence was later corroborated by a witness who allegedly saw Tudo at the scene of the crime. But the added publicity that came with being suspected of taking the life of a Good Samaritan wasn't enough to capture Tudo. Despite one of the largest manhunts in the state's history at the time, and multiple cash rewards for information, no one saw Tudo again. Tudo remained on the FBI's most wanted list for another 12 years, until in 1964, a mafia turncoat named Joseph Valachi told authorities about his fate. According to Valachi, Tudo hadn't attacked Arnold due to some loyalty to Sutton, as the letters suggested. Instead, mob boss Albert Anastasia had heard about Arnold on the news and became enraged. He told Tudo that he hated snitches and ordered him to take Arnold out. After the crime was committed, Anastasia realized he'd acted too brashly and had Tudo taken out and secretly buried. Whether the story is true or not is still open to debate, but it was convincing enough for authorities in Pennsylvania to drop the case against him. Ollie Jean Embry became one of the youngest people ever featured on the FBI's most wanted list when he was added at the age of 18. On the 6th of February, 1951, Embry, along with fellow criminals Patrick Kane and James McAllister, entered the Monroe National Bank after deciding to rob it. Their getaway driver, Frank DeBosch, was waiting outside in a car that they had stolen earlier. After holding up the bank and being handed $8,855, the four men made their getaway, spreading roofing nails across the road as they fled in an attempt to keep any pursuers off of their trail. But as they sped away, DeBosch lost control of the car and ended up crashing into a ditch. They promptly got out and stole another car, and managed to escape the scene of the crash. DeBosch would be arrested by East St. Louis police later when they noticed that he was driving a new car. The identities of the other three robbers soon came to light, and police started hunting for them. Embry, McAllister, and Kane had arranged to meet at the George Washington Hotel in St. Louis to divide the money, but when Embry arrived, he became suspicious of a man who was sitting in the hotel lobby and decided to leave. The other two men were quickly arrested. On the 5th of August, 1951, Embry was apprehended by FBI agents and police while working at a gas station as an attendant. Officers pulled into the station and asked him to check their car's radiator, and as he raised the hood, he was grabbed by the FBI agents. He was unarmed and surrendered without incident. They would later tell Embry that someone on the street recognized him from his wanted poster and tipped them off. At the time of his arrest, he had only been on the wanted list for a total of 12 days. Jesse James Hollywood was born and raised in West Hills in San Fernando Valley, California. In the mid-90s, his family moved to Colorado, where his father attempted to run a restaurant, but they would eventually return to West Hills. He would be expelled from his high school after going off at one of his teachers in a violent fit. He was transferred to Calabasas High School, where he played on the varsity baseball team until he was forced to give up the sport due to injury. He then recruited former high school friends William Skidmore, Brian Affronti, Benjamin Markowitz, and Jesse Rugg, and together they started a profitable business dealing in illegal substances. The half-brother of Benjamin Markowitz, Nicholas, owed Hollywood a total of $36,000, and the group decided to kidnap him to force Benjamin to pay the debt on his behalf. After abducting him, Hollywood and his crew drove Nicholas Markowitz to Santa Barbara, where they held him for 3 days. When a lawyer informed Hollywood that he and his gang would be facing life in prison for kidnapping, he became worried and ordered a subordinate, Ryan Hoyt, to end Markowitz's life. Hoyt and a few other associates took him to a rural part of Santa Barbara and carried out Hollywood's orders. He would be found 5 days later. Hoyt was eventually arrested, prompting Hollywood to flee to Canada before entering Mexico aided by his father, his godfather, and his girlfriend. Here, he lived on the beach and assumed the identity of Michael Costa Garro while learning to speak Portuguese to blend in. His first job was putting up advertising posters for a local club, after which he started offering private English lessons and became a dog walker. He was added to the FBI's most wanted list at the age of 20. During this time, he met a woman named Marcia Reyes, and in November of 2004, she fell pregnant with his child. He believed that this would stop him from being extradited back to the United States, as Brazilian law made provision for the protection of fathers of native Brazilians. This law had been changed sometime earlier, however, and he was traveling on a false passport, and hence was an illegal immigrant. In March of 2005, US authorities and Brazilian agents learned that he had made plans to meet his cousin at a mall, and he was arrested. His trial started on the 15th of May 2009, and on the 8th of July, he was found guilty of kidnapping and first-degree murder with special circumstances. On the 15th of July, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Malcolm Lorenzo Jones was added to the FBI's list when he was just 21 years old, after he and an accomplice, Nelson Jones, held up the Key Bank on Springdale Road in Cincinnati on the 22nd of May, 2017. Malcolm entered the bank first, brandishing a firearm, and ordering customers and employees out of the bank to get down on the floor. He then opened the bank's front door so that Nelson could enter, but unbeknownst to them, an off-duty police officer, Carl Rauschenberger, had entered right behind Nelson. When the officer realized what was happening, he produced his weapon, telling the men to get on the floor. As Malcolm moved toward the ground, he fired at Rauschenberger but missed. He then jumped over a counter to find cover but was struck by the officer. However, he managed to escape on foot with Nelson close behind, making off with $3,500. Nelson would go on to rob 2 more banks before he was apprehended thanks to DNA and fingerprint evidence, while Malcolm was eventually tracked down and arrested in October of 2017. At his trial, Malcolm testified that he had been under the influence of Nelson and that he was forced into committing the robbery, even though he didn't want to, a sentiment that was shared by some of his fellow accomplices. Malcolm would ultimately be sentenced to 12 years behind bars. Katherine Ann Power, also known as May Kelly, and Alice Louise Metzinger, was added to the FBI's most wanted list in 1970 when she was 21 years old. She was one of 7 children that grew up in Denver, Colorado. In 1976, she started studying at a university in Boston, Massachusetts, at a time when students were regularly holding protests against the Vietnam War. Here, she started attending Students for Democratic Society protests, along with her roommate, Susan Edith Sachs. They then met Stanley Ray Bond, an ex-convict and soldier who was attending classes at the university via a special program. Bond introduced the 2 women to ex-convicts William Gilday and Robert Valeri, and together they decided to rob the State Street Bank and Trust. On the 20th of September, 1970, the group robbed a National Guard armory in Newburyport, stealing weapons and setting fire to the facility afterwards, causing approximately $125,000 of damage. 3 days later, they would perform another robbery at a bank in Brighton while heavily armed. One police officer lost his life while trying to intervene, and the group managed to escape with $26,000 in cash that they intended to use to overthrow the government. Police decided to investigate Power's apartment, and when they carried out a raid, they found evidence linking her to both robberies, including weapons and a telephone switchboard that belonged to the armory. Gilday, Valeri, and Bond were taken into custody shortly after the Brighton robbery, and Bond would pass away in prison. Valeri decided to turn state's witness and testified against Gilday, receiving a sentence of 25 years for the robbery, while Gilday went on to be sentenced to death. Power and Sachs, however, were still on the loose and had been included on the FBI's most wanted list, becoming the 16th and 17th individuals to be added. At first, the 2 women hid out in women's communes, but Sachs would eventually be tracked down in Philadelphia and arrested in 1975. She was sentenced to 5 years behind bars. In 1974, reports came in that Power had been spotted in Kentucky, but she still evaded police. In 1979, she relocated to Oregon and gave birth to a son. As time went by, it became a cold case, and Power was eventually removed from the most wanted list in 1984. By 1985, she, her son and boyfriend, Ron Duncan, moved to the city of Lebanon in Willamette Valley, and she started giving cooking classes at Lynn Benton Community College. She also worked at restaurants and became a part owner of a restaurant and bakery in Eugene. At the time, she was seeing a therapist, Linda Carroll, in who she confided about her past. She decided that she no longer wanted to live under her alias and started preparing to hand herself over to the authorities. She married Duncan in 1992 and revealed her true identity to her friends, and in 1993, negotiated her surrender with police, who then took her into custody. She pleaded guilty to armed robbery and manslaughter on the 15th of September, 1993 in Boston. She was found guilty and sentenced to serve 8 to 12 years for the bank robbery and 5 years plus a $10,000 fine for the National Guard Armory incident. Duncan would go on to adopt her son, and in 1999 she was released and placed on 14 years of probation. Shena Miner became another addition to the FBI's most wanted list on the 28th of June, 2016, aged 24. She was the 10th woman to be added to the list after committing a senseless and heinous crime on the 6th of March of that same year. On that day, Miner had gone over to her neighbor, Tamika Perry's house on 30th and Hour Street, Milwaukee, to settle an argument over loud music that Perry had been playing a week earlier. The argument got heated and Miner challenged Perry to a fight, firing a weapon into the air several times before being convinced by her mother to leave the property. However, at 3 a.m., she returned to Perry's house and started the argument once again. And when it got too loud, Miner's mother went over to the house to try to calm the two women down again. Miner told her mother that Tamika had disrespected her, but she told her to leave anyway and just let it go. Miner refused, however, and her mother attempted to push her outside, but her pleas fell on deaf ears, and Miner persisted with the fight. Perry's boyfriend would later tell police that he noticed a firearm in Miner's hand, and while arguing in a hallway with the Miner's mother standing in between them, Miner pointed the weapon at Perry and fired, hitting her in the chest and ending her life. Miner then jumped in a car and fled the scene, evading capture and ending up added to the FBI's most wanted list, with the $100,000 reward being offered for information leading to her capture. Her stay on the list was a short one, however, as she was tracked down in Fayetteville, North Carolina 2 days later and taken into custody. At her trial, she would enter a guilty plea, and her attorney argued that she hadn't taken the weapon for the purposes of ending Perry's life, as she carried it with her at all times. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Most people would never even consider defrauding someone else, since it could have dire consequences on their lives, especially when it involves something as sensitive as medical care that they need. But unfortunately, not everyone shares this sentiment, as some people are in the habit of putting their own wants and needs first, and in some cases don't consider the repercussions their actions could have. One such man is now listed on the FBI's list of most wanted fugitives, as he was found to have orchestrated a Medicare healthcare fraud scheme and fled before he could face a judge in court. At the time, Ayari Ayayi Amim, who also operates under several aliases, including Kwame Ayayi, Pastor Kwame, and Man of God, was working at a healthcare facility in Arlington, Texas, called the Paradise Home Health Agency. According to the allegations that have been brought against him, Amim operated with several accomplices between 2010 and 2011, and together they paid kickbacks in cash to Medicare beneficiaries, recruiting them as patients and ensuring that they appeared to be in the care of the facility. In reality, Medicare was being billed for services that none of these patients needed, and to hide this fact, Amim went as far as to falsify patient records, making it seem as though they were eligible for healthcare services that would be administered at their homes. When the scheme eventually came to light, an arrest warrant was granted and Amim was quickly tracked down. After being placed in custody on the 8th of May, 2015, he made an appearance in court and was ordered to be released on bail. His trial was scheduled to start on the 15th of August the following year, when a jury would have heard testimony against him, but Amim never showed up, resulting in a federal arrest warrant being issued against him. Since Amim originally hails from Ghana, it's suspected that he might be hiding out there, though he also has ties to the United Kingdom, Canada, and certain parts of the US, including the Northeast regions and Fort Worth, Texas. On the flyer that's been released by the FBI, Amim is described as a 37-year-old male who stands 6 feet tall. He weighs around 200 pounds and has black hair and brown eyes. All efforts to locate Amim have been unsuccessful, and the FBI has asked the public for help in tracking him down, though he should not be approached if he is spotted. A $1,000 reward is being offered to anyone who comes forward with information that leads to Amim's arrest, so that he can face the consequences of his actions. It isn't known whether the established patients of the facility who received kickbacks from Amim and his co-conspirators will face any legal ramifications for accepting the money, as this information isn't publicly available. Currently, Amim remains on the FBI's most wanted list, and he will remain there until he's brought to justice, though this may prove hard to accomplish if he's fled back to his home country of Ghana. If you or anyone you know have any information on Amim's current whereabouts, or have any further information on his fraud case, you're asked to contact the FBI's Dallas field office at 972-559-5000. Alternatively, you can contact your nearest FBI field office, American Embassy, or Consulate. One would imagine that if someone were planning to file fraudulent healthcare documentation that relates to fictional patient visits, they would have the foresight to ensure that they were in the office on the day of the alleged consultations. If this isn't done, it makes it much easier to prove that they were submitting false documentation. But it seems that his thought didn't cross the mind of one doctor, who's now on the run after being added to the FBI's most wanted list. In 2012, Dr. Yusef Kurdi was the owner and operator of a medical facility called Broadway Medical Center, where he treated patients who trusted his expertise and morals as a doctor. But unbeknownst to them, he was conducting a fraud scheme that included not only tax evasion, but also identity theft and crimes relating to illegal cash kickbacks. Investigators in Kurdi's case have stated that he devised a scheme where he billed both Medicare and Medi-Cal for patient visits that never took place. These payments came to a total of more than $150,000. These false claims lined Kurdi's pockets, despite the fact that he'd provided no medical services, and it's extremely likely that he would have continued doing so if his illegal activities hadn't been brought to light. During an investigation into the allegations, it was found that Kurdi, for reasons unknown, decided to submit one of these false documents that showed he wasn't even in his place of work at the time, something that immediately drew attention to the fact that he was engaging in illegal activities. For example, some of the documents that he submitted to the two Medicare institutions showed that he was consulting with patients while he was actually attending medical education classes. In another of these instances, it was discovered that he wasn't even in town at the time of the supposed patient visits. And even worse, he claimed for services provided to patients who were no longer alive. All of these allegations are very serious indeed, but his deception didn't stop there. Kurdi also claimed around $1 million for Medicare and Medi-Cal, and received kickbacks for referring some of his patients who had fraudulent prescriptions to pharmacies around the California area. A warrant for his arrest was eventually issued in January of 2012, and when Kurdi was informed of this, he told investigators that he would be handing himself over to the authorities willingly and without incident, but he remains a fugitive from the law. Once all of these allegations came to light, Kurdi was and remains suspended from participating in the California workers' compensation system as a physician, a practitioner, or a provider. He was also given the opportunity to request a hearing within 10 days of being informed of his suspension, but he failed to do so. Since he obtained his medical degree in Syria at the University of Aleppo, investigators suspect that he may be hiding out there, but this is only speculation at this point. After Kurdi failed to hand himself over on the 30th of January, 2012, a federal warrant was issued for his arrest, and he was charged with healthcare fraud, aggravated identity theft, receipt of kickbacks for patient referrals, income tax evasion, aiding and abetting, and criminal forfeiture. If you know where Kurdi may be at present, or have any information that could further the case against him, you're urged to contact your local FBI office or the nearest American embassy or consulate. Usually, when a criminal is taken into custody, they face a few charges for whatever transgression they committed. But one man who's listed on the FBI's most wanted list is facing as many as 20 charges for his misdeeds, while he worked as the Food Services Administrator for the Oregon Department of Corrections. 52-year-old Farad Fred Monem is alleged to have received kickbacks totaling $1.2 million from food vendors that were selling products that have been described as distressed to the State Corrections Department. Monem worked with 5 different vendors during the scheme, which ran between 2000 and 2006. The food that was provided to him had already expired and hence should have been disposed of properly, but Monem had other plans. Other items had been packaged incorrectly and hence cost a fraction of the price that it normally would. This allowed Monem to purchase the items at a discounted rate, which he did knowing that they should have been disposed of instead. The bribery transactions between Monem and the vendors were always settled with cash, and the food was then delivered to his house via a courier, and he would collect it while he spent time in Las Vegas. After he was arrested, his house and safety deposit boxes were searched, and investigators discovered that he had over $500,000 in cash that he received in kickbacks. When it came to light his misdeeds had been discovered, Monem fled to his home country of Iran, where he's still in hiding at present. But it would seem that he's having a hard time readjusting to life there, according to an interview conducted by the Oregonian newspaper. Referring to his crime as a mistake, Monem stated that he would be willing to return to the US and that he would surrender to authorities as long as he didn't have to spend too much time in prison. He added that in his opinion he didn't actually do anything wrong since he didn't hurt anybody. He explained that he's always done his job and while doing so, managed to save the taxpayers of Oregon a lot of money. Monem was arrested in 2007 and immediately started negotiating a plea deal, but he fled the country before this could be completed. His wife, 47-year-old Karen Monem, was found to also play a part in the scheme, and she was found guilty in 2009, after which she was ordered to spend a year in jail. But her court date was repeatedly postponed, since she had to tend to her ailing mother and son with whom she lives with in Salem. It isn't known whether this was a factor in her sentencing, but a judge ruled that she serve no jail time, and instead would serve 4 months in-home detention and probation. Her home detention does, however, allow her to go to work as a store clerk every day. But Monem believes that the 6 to 8 years in prison that he's facing is too harsh of a sentence, and has stated that he would be willing to return to Oregon for his prison sentence if it were reduced. But this is unlikely to happen, since an assistant U.S. attorney has stated that Monem is in no position to negotiate, since he fled the country before he could be sentenced. As for the vendors he was working for, 4 have been arrested and served their time in prison after pleading guilty, with the worst of these stints being 3 months. He's since stated that he would prefer spending time in jail compared to the harsh conditions that he's facing while living in Iran, despite adding that his father is very wealthy and he's currently caring for him. Monem has also stated that he loves the US and truly wants to return one day, but if he ever does so, it'll be a few years before he's released from prison to resume his normal life. In yet another scheme involving the Medicare program, 3 brothers, Carlos, Luis, and Jose Benitez, are on the run after it was announced that they were being sought by the FBI on charges that include healthcare fraud and money laundering. One of their co-conspirators, 55-year-old Jose Garcia, had also been on the run since 2008, but he eventually willingly handed himself over to agents in the Miami National Airport in 2010, and he was taken into custody. Working alongside Neda Freire, Garcia submitted fraudulent claims to Medicare, totaling $10.9 million between April and November of 2003. These claims were submitted on behalf of Global Medcare Corp., which has since been found to belong to the Benitez brothers. It's alleged that during this time, the group trained and employed physicians and their assistants at the facility, creating the impression that they were delivering medical services to HIV patients, but this simply wasn't the case. Once they received payment from Medicare, the money was then laundered through spurious marketing and management companies that were also owned by the Bonita Brothers, all of whom are still on the loose. For their efforts, Garcia and Freire faced charges that included conspiracy to defraud the United States, submission of false claims to the Medicare program, conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, and 4 counts of money laundering. Garcia saw 4 more charges added to those that he was already facing, which were 4 counts of submitting false claims to the Medicare program. After being taken into custody, Freire pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 30 months in prison. After her release, she'll also have to undergo 2 years of supervision and has been ordered to pay nearly $8 million to Medicare in restitution. She also admitted that they convinced some of their patients to receive kickbacks after allowing the group to claim for medical services that were never delivered. She then explained that after the company received the money, they would pay those proceeds into the fake accounts that were being managed by the brothers and another man named Thomas McKenzie. The Bonita Brothers and McKenzie were each charged with healthcare fraud and money laundering after it was discovered that they'd recruited the company's staff. They would also recruit patients to participate in the scheme, but their crimes were soon uncovered and the brothers went on the run. McKenzie was also taken into custody and sentenced to 14 years behind bars, and he'll also have to pay millions of dollars in compensation. As for the Bonita Brothers, they currently remain fugitives, and the FBI has asked that anyone with information on their whereabouts contact their nearest FBI office. Since the 1st of March 2010, a task force named Operation Stolen Dreams has identified over 1,200 cases of mortgage fraud, and 485 people have been taken into custody. These cases involve email scams, illegal property flipping, and knowingly providing incorrect information on mortgage applications. Thanks to this operation, 4 men, 34-year-old Vetloy Nalvarath, 55-year-old Bradley Turbin, 43-year-old Udom Somi, and 74-year-old estate agent Chris Briley Jr. were identified as co-conspirators in a scheme that involves double escrows, straw buyers, and using mortgage loans for their personal use. A straw buyer is someone who poses as a purchaser of a property in order to keep the name of the actual buyer from being discovered. As for double escrows, these occur when 2 contracts are set up for the same property, and it's then sold twice in a short period of time at 2 different prices. To do this, Briley and escrow officer Brenda Jackson received overvalued appraisals from real estate appraisers and then submitted those figures to lenders. Once these properties were sold, the funds were then diverted to personal bank accounts, resulting in $470,000 being stolen. It also came to light that Turbin started the scheme in 2006 or 2007, and that he and an unidentified co-conspirator planned to commit bank fraud. They then recruited a 3rd person to act as the straw buyer, who would then purchase the house a few months later for hundreds of thousands of dollars more than the property was valued at. During the straw buyer's loan application process, Turbin would provide false information to the lender, including their monthly income, assets, place of employment, and intent to purchase the house. He would claim that the straw buyer had been employed by his company, Turbin International, for the previous 3 years, and that everything was in order and above the board, when the reality was that the buyer had no intention of doing so. One example of this was during the sale of a house situated at Royal Crystal Street in Las Vegas, where it was sold to the straw buyer for $200,000. But the money provided by a lender, a company called Countrywide Home Loans, was then diverted to a personal bank account. It should be noted that the lender was in no way affiliated with the scheme. Nalvarath, Somi, and Briley were taken into custody in June of 2010, and Nalvarath, who's listed on the FBI's most wanted list, stated that he couldn't afford an attorney. Hence, a court-appointed attorney was provided after he was charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Briley and Jackson were charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and bank fraud, as well as wire fraud and bank fraud, but Jackson also faced additional conspiracy and fraud charges. It's alleged that the pair diverted $470,000 to their personal bank accounts, after also fraudulently selling houses in Las Vegas. Nalvarath, who originally hails from Laos, was found to have used a straw buyer to purchase properties, after which he would quickly resell them at a much higher price. He also convinced several people of his Laotian community in Nevada to invest in several properties in Las Vegas, but he would then use their identities as straw buyers, after which he would quickly flip the property again. It's also come to light that he would sometimes use the same identity to buy several properties, resulting in the investor ending up with millions of dollars in mortgage debts. Investigators found that he would then use his ill-gotten money to support his lavish lifestyle. Once he was tracked down and arrested, Navarath pleaded guilty since there was an overwhelming amount of evidence against him, and he was sentenced to serve 33 months in jail. He was supposed to report to the Bureau of Prisons in May of 2012 to start serving his sentence, but instead went on the run, and he's still being sought by the FBI today. His wife and children are still living in Las Vegas. Navarath is described as having brown hair and brown eyes. He stands 5 foot 10 inches tall and weighs around 165 pounds. He can also be identified by the tattoos that he has on his back and right shoulder, though a detailed description of these isn't available. If you know where Navarath may be hiding out, or have any additional information on this case, you're asked to contact your nearest FBI office. According to court records, 74-year-old Vincent Tomera was the owner of a company called Pacific Equity and Capital, Inc., which he marketed as a privately owned real estate services company that specializes in facilitating clients in areas including financing, investment, acquisition, and management. He also claimed that the company could provide loans to private individuals and businesses in California, specifically mortgage loans that were made possible by the company's investors. But it soon came to light that he was never authorized to provide these services, since he didn't have a license to do so. It was also discovered that his real estate license had been revoked in 1987, and that he had never been licensed as a securities broker or investment advisor. Added to this was the fact that he also acted as an asset manager without a license. Tomera would convince would-be investors that they stood to make a lot of money if they were to invest in his company, and that there would be virtually no risk involved, an opportunity that many people would be more than willing to seize. But their investment would not be a small one. Tomera set the minimum amount that could be invested at $50,000, promising that this would see a return of between 10% and 14% per year in interest. He then offered his investors securities that included fractionalized trust deeds, evidence of indebtedness, certificates of interests, and investment contracts, but he never had the right to make any of these promises since he never registered with the SEC and was never accredited by the Department of Corporations. His investors were none the wiser to the fact that he no longer had a real estate license, and that its reinstatement had been denied. It would also later be revealed that Tomera's company was already on shaky ground with the California Secretary of State's office, and that he then created a fake business name, but continued to operate using his fraudulent business. This meant that he was not paying taxes at any point after the suspension. Records further state that Tomera told his investors that they should sell their publicly traded stock or retirement funds to invest in his company, and again, he was not allowed to do so since he never obtained a certificate from the California Corporations Commissioner. Not knowing that they were investing in a scam, several people fell for the scammer's lies, and they lost more than $1 million. As soon as his deception came to light, an arrest warrant was issued for Tomera, and he was charged with 4 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of mail fraud. He's been on the run since 2012 after the arrest warrant was granted, and a $5,000 reward is being offered to anyone who has information that leads to Tomera's arrest and conviction, since his current whereabouts remain unknown. Tomera is described as having brown hair and brown eyes. He stands 6 foot 1 inches tall and weighs about 225 pounds. He's also considered to be an international flight risk, and hence, if he's spotted, he should not be approached, since this may prompt him to flee again. If you or anyone you know has any information on where Tomera could be hiding out, or have any other information that could lead to his arrest, you're asked to get in touch with your local FBI office or the nearest American embassy or consulate. Rhoda Taher is known to be a scam artist, and he's currently one of the criminals included in the FBI's most wanted list. But this isn't the first time that he's been sought by the long arm of the law. At one point, Taher decided to flee to the Middle East to avoid capture, after it was discovered that he'd been setting up fake companies. He then used these companies to deposit stolen checks into several banks in South Florida, lining his pockets before his scheme was uncovered. He's still wanted on those charges, but he seemingly just continued with his deceptive ways once he successfully fled, as it's been found that he's responsible for an internet scheme that targets people's email accounts. He would also send emails in which he claimed that people had won a lottery, or that they'd inherited a large amount of money, but this was of course all a lie. One of these victims contacted the scammers, but they would be told that the money was ready to be paid into their bank accounts, but in order for this to be done, they needed to pay certain fees or taxes. If they agreed to pay these fees, the money would be sent to overseas bank accounts. It's alleged that he employed several money mules who were told to set up shell companies. These companies then acquired bank accounts into which the proceeds of his scheme were paid. But these accounts were incredibly hard to trace, since they were situated in countries all over the world, including Germany, China, and the United Arab Emirates. But Taher didn't act alone, as it was soon discovered that his wife served as his accomplice. His wife was less likely in danger of being caught, since she dealt with the money laundering and the bank fraud side of the scheme from overseas, and it's believed that she's currently hiding out in Beirut with Taher. One of Taher's mules, who's been named Veloso, is known to have recruited more mules to grow the scheme even further. Those mules would then do the same, and today, it's believed that more than 200 mules were used to launder the money that was stolen. It was discovered that Taher and his co-conspirators set up fake email accounts that were very similar to those of employees of legitimate businesses. They would then use these email accounts to request payment for invoices that also looked genuine, conning many people into parting with their money. Once the money was safely in these bank accounts, it would quickly be withdrawn at ATMs or in person at bank branches. Some of the money was also quickly spent through debit card purchases or transferred into foreign bank accounts that were controlled by other members of the group. Veloso would eventually be captured, and he faced a long prison sentence of up to 25 years, as well as a fine of $270,000. As for Taher, he's still likely in Lebanon, though it's believed that he also travels to Nigeria and Sierra Leone on occasion. There is a slim chance that he may still be in the United States, and if this is the case, he's likely to be in Boston, Massachusetts, Farmington Hills, or Detroit, Michigan. Taher is considered to be an escape risk, and if he's spotted, the authorities should be notified immediately. He's described as having black hair, but was known to have shaved his head, and has brown eyes, stands at 5 foot 6 inches tall, and weighs between 150 to 190 pounds. If you have any helpful information on Taher's case, you're asked to contact the FBI's Miami field office at 754-703-2000. A federal arrest warrant has been issued for 72-year-old Rodney Allen, who hails from Boise, Idaho, and he's known to be the owner of a brokerage company called KA Investments LLC. He's also one of the fugitives named on the FBI's most wanted list, though it isn't known where he is at present. Allen is wanted for his involvement in a scheme that was run in either 2016 or 2017, in which he defrauded many of his company's clients by making false promises and by using their money for his own personal gain. The clients in question had invested in Allen's company after he convinced them to do so. He then provided them with statements that showed they were earning positive returns on those investments, but these were faked and their money was actually being spent elsewhere, and their investments were quickly dwindling. In one incident that took place on the 6th of December 2016, one of Allen's clients received an email containing their monthly statement. The statement claimed that they'd earned 1.903 interest that month, but the truth was they lost more than 36%. But this was only one side of Allen's deception. He also told his investors that he didn't make much profit, since he only took between 14 and 18% commission on their investment profits, when he was actually using their money to line his own pockets, regardless of whether a profit was being made or not. At this point, Allen's investors were none the wiser to his scam, but they soon started to become concerned when he suddenly disappeared on the 20th of April 2017 and could no longer be contacted. His truck was found abandoned near the Snake River, and several searches were organized that included the aid of sniffer dogs. None of these searches ever found any trace of Allen, and it isn't known whether he went missing of his own accord or if he'd been the victim of foul play, Whatever the case may be, he is still wanted by the FBI, and a $10,000 reward has been offered to anyone who comes forward with information leading to his current whereabouts and his arrest. It's been speculated that Allen is still residing and possibly working in Idaho, and if this is the case, there's a good chance that he'll be spotted by a member of the public, who should then immediately contact the Idaho police. Crime Stoppers are offering an additional $1,000 reward for Allen's capture, and anyone who knows where he might be or who can provide further information on his fraudulent dealings is asked to contact the Salt Lake City FBI field office at 801-579-1400. Alternatively, you can contact your local FBI office or nearest American embassy or consulate. Allen is described as having gray hair, brown eyes, and stands 6 feet tall. He weighs 185 pounds and would be 72 years old at present. It should be noted that he's known to carry a firearm and hence should not be approached by anyone other than a police officer or other member of law enforcement. Scottish man James Alexander Ward has been added to the FBI's most wanted list, as it's been found that he was involved in a precious metals scheme that existed in Florida between September of 2007 and March of 2010. After the allegations against him were announced in 2012, Ward, who also goes by the alias Jamie D. Ward, went on the run, and he's still not been tracked down, as his current whereabouts remain a mystery. According to the allegations against him, Ward was the operator of a company called Castle & Hawk Inc. that dealt with investments in precious metals such as gold, platinum, and silver. The scheme involved roping in as many people to invest in the company, and when all was said and done, Ward had collected as much as $400,000 from at least 12 clients, but they never saw any return on their investments. Instead, Ward kept the money for himself, though it's believed that he spent a good portion of it and he never acquired any of the metals that he promised he would, leaving his victims with a great amount of money lost. Clients were told that they could invest 23% of the cost of the metals in question, after which the company would acquire loans to cover the remaining 77%. After the metals were bought, they would be stored in a secure depository. But the reality of the situation was that none of these loans were ever made, though Ward still charged his investors interest on these fictitious loans, further lining his pockets with money that he had no right to keep. He was charged with wire fraud along with his accomplice, Nathaniel R. Walker, both of whom hail from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was also discovered that the pair were selling palladium on a leveraged basis, which is strictly prohibited by the Commodity Exchange Act. The money made from this scheme was used to pay for a vehicle that was then owned by Ward, as well as any expenses relating to that vehicle. He also used investors' money to pay his rent, eat expensive meals in several restaurants, and to buy groceries at a well-known chain store. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission has also revealed that Castle & Hawk Inc. was never registered with them, and hence all of his business dealings were fraudulent. Once Ward's scheme was uncovered, a complaint was laid against him, and a judge ordered that all of his assets be frozen and that his financial records, as well as those of his company, be seized to avoid the possibility that they may be altered or destroyed. In an interview with the Sun newspaper, Ward's brother Michael stated that his family hasn't seen or heard from Ward since he left home as a teenager, but he instantly recognized him when he saw the FBI's most wanted poster containing his brother's photo. When asked whether he knew where Ward may be hiding out, he responded that if the FBI is struggling to track him down, then there's no way that he could do so. He added that his brother left home when he was 17 and relocated to London, where he started working in stocks and shares. But he did, however, add that he's heard rumors that Ward has immigrated to Canada, but this is mere speculation. Ward is described as having blonde hair, though he may have changed its color to avoid being spotted. He has hazel eyes, stands 5 foot 8 inches tall, and weighs around 155 pounds. It's believed that he may be hiding out somewhere in the UK, including England, Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland. Anyone who spots Ward or knows where he may be at present is urged to contact the FBI's Miami field office at 754-703-2000 or your nearest FBI office. One would expect a Department of Public Safety officer to be a shining example to the community around them. But in the case of retired DPS officer Frederick Arias, the exact opposite seems to be true, as he's currently a fugitive who's being hunted by the FBI. Arias and his accomplice, Bradley Tennyson, a former financial advisor, created a fictional nonprofit humanitarian organization in Gilbert, Arizona that they called the Joseph Project, and as soon as they did so, they started looking for investors. Potential clients were told that the company was a Christian organization and that their investments would be completely risk-free. Not only this, but they were guaranteed to see a positive return on those investments, and their money would be put towards a good cause, as it would be used for certain humanitarian projects. But when an investigation was launched into the company's dealings, the FBI discovered the pair had stolen $9.5 million from their clients. This was done by transferring the funds into several accounts, some of which were opened under the two men's names. One transaction that was found revealed that they had purchased a total of 50,820 silver coins that were slated to be shipped to another country, and at that time were being stored in a New York Brinks cash handling facility. When this illegal activity was discovered, Arias was arrested and charged with conspiracy, fraudulent schemes, money laundering, theft, illegal control of an enterprise, forgery, and fraudulent schemes. The coins, which were valued at $1.6 million, were then liquidated and the resulting funds returned to their rightful owners thanks to a Supreme Court judgment, despite efforts from the two scammers to contest the ruling. 3 days after Arias was taken into custody, he was released on bond and was to attend an extradition hearing, but he failed to show up and another charge of failure to appear was added to his already lengthy list. He currently has 3 arrest warrants against his name, and he was also charged with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, and it's believed that he may be hiding out in Canada, Norway, Australia, the Czech Republic, or the Dominican Republic. Tennyson has been arrested and convicted for his role in the scheme, and he's been ordered to repay restitution of more than $9 million, which he will be paying in monthly installments, but his accomplice remains a wanted man. The FBI has asked for the public's help in tracking down Arias. He's described as having brown hair and hazel eyes, stands between 5'8" and 5'10", and was last known to weigh around 210 pounds. He's also known to speak both English and Spanish. A $250,000 reward is being offered to anyone who can provide investigators with information that leads to Arias' arrest and conviction. But he should be considered an escape risk and hence should not be approached if he's recognized. Anyone who's aware of Arias' current whereabouts should get in contact with the FBI's Phoenix field office at 623-466-1999 or contact your local FBI office or nearest American embassy or consulate. Most people will tell you that it's harder than ever to make money these days as unemployment numbers are very high and inflation keeps rising, forcing many people to work multiple jobs to make a decent living wage. Because of this, many people decide to use their money to trade on the stock market. But not everyone has that kind of expertise, so they invest in trading firms that employ experts in this field. This isn't a sure way to make more money, as there are many risks involved, but most people would consider this to be a wise way to invest money, since there's a good chance that they will see a good return on their investment. But as is the case with most industries, there are always people who look for loopholes in the system, or for people who they can exploit for their own financial gain. And when this happens, the impact on their victims can be devastating. The problem with this kind of scam is that it's incredibly hard to spot, since all of the paperwork looks completely legit. In some cases, the companies that people invest in are legally registered and look above the board, and they generally receive positive reviews, though these are also often faked. These cases usually end the same way, with the company's owner lining their pockets with their investors' money, before eventually being found out, confronted, and spending time in prison, while their victims scramble to put their lives back together. This seems to be the case with a company called QYU, which was owned and operated by Darren Anthony Robinson, a United States citizen who ran the company out of Panama as well as the Cayman Islands, and who's now been added to the FBI most wanted list of fugitives that are still on the loose. Robinson has been indicted on as many as 11 counts of wire fraud and another count of money laundering, after it was discovered that the company was actually a clever front for a Ponzi scheme that he was running. The announcement of Robinson's wanted status was made in January of 2024 by attorney Don Eisen, as well as the special agent in charge of the Detroit Field Division of the FBI, Agent Gibson, and Agent Miller from Detroit's IRS field office, specifically the Criminal Investigation Division. Robinson was taken into custody regarding this same case in the past, and he was forced to wear a GPS tether after being released on bond so that his movements could be tracked since he was considered to be a flight risk. But it was soon discovered that he'd unlawfully removed the tether and decided to go on the run, further strengthening the FBI's case against him and securing his place on their most wanted list. Investors were lured to place their confidence in Robinson and his company by promises of wealth that he made, in one instance telling would-be investors that if they were to trust him with $100,000 of their money in 2014, they would be multimillionaires by the year 2021, since they would then have seen their investment grow to $2 million. To further lure them in, Robinson claimed that the company was regularly generating hugely positive results on past investments, and that many of his previous investors had become very wealthy, depending on how much of their money they decided to entrust to him and his firm, though it's very likely that none of this ever actually happened. In another unbelievable claim, Robinson stated that QYU had seen profitable returns on investments for every single month in the years between 2014 and 2021, creating the impression that money could be made with minimal effort and virtually no risk whatsoever. In fact, he went so far as to state that every investment is guaranteed to see positive returns every month. And to put investors' minds at ease, he claimed he would only be paid from trading profits and not investor principal. This means that the original amount of money invested by one of his clients would never be touched, and that Robinson would only receive financial gains as long as his company kept seeing positive returns every month, once again creating the notion that there was zero risk involved. But it was then discovered that Robinson was actually running a Ponzi scheme, which usually means that the first lot of investors are paid via the money that later investors bring into the company, making it seem as though the company is doing very well and making a lot of profit. The ones who truly suffer here are the later investors, who often end up losing every cent that they invested. While these kinds of cases usually end with the culprit being ordered to repay their victims, this doesn't always happen since much of the money has been squandered away or used to cover the criminal's tracks. In Robinson's case, it was found that he followed this exact narrative, and although he did use some of his investors' money to trade as promised, most of it was used to keep his early investors happy, likely because his company wasn't doing nearly as well as he claimed it was. There have been many cases where these kinds of firms start out completely above the board and with the best intentions of their investors in mind. But when the firm runs into trouble, the operator panics, and rather than owning up to the fact that they lost a lot of money, they attempt to cover their tracks by turning it into a Ponzi scheme, sometimes unwittingly. But in Robinson's case, it's believed that he knew what he was doing all along, and that he always had the intention of swindling money from those who trusted him with their life savings, a truly deplorable act. It was also found that later investors' money was used by QYU to pay their employees, cover the company's many expenses, and to fund Robinson's lavish lifestyle, contrary to the promises that he made in order to convince people to invest in his firm. To keep the wool over his investors' eyes, he produced fake documentation, including spurious account statements that were sent to them on a monthly basis. To make it seem as though these statements were legitimate, he also falsified trading data, and no one was any the wiser until his nefarious dealings were eventually uncovered. When all was said and done, Robinson had collected as much as $100 million from his investors, many of whom were found to hail from Southeast Michigan, though it's believed that there may be many more from other parts of the country, and possibly around the globe. Though it should be noted that Robinson has only been indicted at this point and is considered innocent until proven guilty, the fact that he removed his GPS tether and fled from law enforcement does not paint him in a very good light. The FBI has asked anyone who's fallen victim to Robinson's scheme, or who has any knowledge of his current whereabouts, to contact them at 1-800-225-5324. Alternatively, you can visit your local FBI office or American Embassy, or you can submit a tip online at tips.fbi.gov. Running an investment firm can be very risky business, since these companies handle other people's hard-earned money, and one mistake could easily result in their entire investment being lost. But it's often the case that these firms employ financial experts who can make accurate predictions as far as investments are concerned, and hence most people feel that their money is safe and will in fact increase as time goes by. But the fact remains that all of this hinges on predictions, and since no one can see into the future, there will be instances where a lot of money is lost, not only for the investor, but the company alike. When this happens, most of these types of firms will make every effort to get their investors' money back. But some operators are left scrupulous and will attempt to shirk their responsibility by fleeing, leaving their clients penniless and with nothing to fall back on. This is seemingly what happened in the case of a man named James Arthur McDonald Jr., who was the owner of two companies called Hercules Investments, which was based in Los Angeles, and Index Strategy Advisors in Redondo Beach, California, and he's currently included on the FBI's most wanted list. To make matters worse, McDonald was a trusted financial analyst who made several appearances on television, specifically on CNBC's Financial TV News Network, which made him seem far more credible than he really was. What a lot of people find strange is the fact that McDonald took a serious risk with his clients' money, when he relied on the fact that the US would soon go through a tumultuous period, something that never happened and resulted in massive losses, none of which have been accounted for so far. In the latter part of 2020, McDonald took a serious chance by predicting that the US economy would see a serious downturn thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic that was rampant at the time, resulting in many countries going into lockdown. As a consequence, many people's jobs were either terminated or put on hold, putting strain on the country's economy. And in many of these regions, a state of emergency was declared, since no one knew how long it would be before the world would return to its normal state. He further banked on his prediction that the US presidential election would cause further disaster to the economy, and that it would result in major sell-offs, which would then cause the stock market to drop drastically. Unfortunately for McDonald, these predictions never came true, and before long he was losing a lot of clients' money, and before long they started demanding answers from his employees, as would be expected. An affidavit states that the losses incurred totaled between $30 million and $40 million, and that's when he started making even worse decisions that only further exacerbated the situation, resulting in even more money being lost. The following year, he asked investors for even more money, again totaling in the millions of dollars, claiming it would be used as capital for the Hercules company, but this only ended up making the situation worse. McDonald failed to disclose the massive losses that his companies had suffered, and was less than truthful about how the newly acquired capital would be used. He stated that he was intending to launch a publicly traded mutual fund named Hercules Fund, which would trade under the ticker symbol NFLHX. But since the losses that the Hercules company had suffered could potentially have resulted in many lawsuits being filed, and hence may have put the mutual fund at risk since these lawsuits would have to be disclosed publicly, he decided to keep quiet about it rather than attempt to right the mistakes that he had made. Nonetheless, he managed to raise a total of $675,000 from his clients by March of 2021. And quite unbelievably, he didn't use this money to mitigate the losses that they had suffered, but continued to make many more terrible decisions that made it clear that by this point, he was no longer concerned about his clients, but started focusing on his own well-being instead. What followed was a large amount of spending in different areas, including a total of $174,610 being spent at a Porsche dealership, $6,800 spent on clothing bought from a designer menswear website, and a total of $109,500 was transferred to the landlord of a property that he was renting in Arcadia, California, with his investors none the wiser. As for McDonald's other company, Index Strategy Advisors, he continued to imply that it was a registered investment advisor firm, but the truth was that he'd withdrawn the company's registered status back in May of 2019. To keep this under wraps, he started creating falsified financial statements that were then sent to his clients. When one of these clients contacted him and informed him that he was in the process of making a down payment on a new home, and hence needed the $351,000 that he'd invested back, he was informed by McDonald that most of his money had been lost, and he would likely never see those funds again. When all of this started to come to light, He was subpoenaed by the United States Securities and Exchange Commission to deliver testimony as to what had happened, but he failed to honor this appointment, raising even more alarm bells. To make matters worse, he'd become completely uncontactable as he was no longer reachable by phone, and had seemingly closed all of his email accounts, allegedly telling one of his friends that he was planning on vanishing for good. During an investigation into the dealings, it would be discovered that he'd used investors' money to pay his personal credit card debts, and now the hunt is on to track him down and take him into custody. But this is easier said than done, as the FBI has no idea where McDonald could be, since it's believed that he'd gone into hiding after fleeing. If he is eventually found, he'll face up to 20 years behind bars for his deception, since he's been charged with violating federal securities law, and will likely be ordered to repay much, if not all of the money that he squandered. The websites for both the Hercules Investments and Index Strategy Advisors have since been taken down, and a CNBC spokesman stated that McDonald would no longer be asked to appear on the channel as a financial advisor. If you know where McDonald may be hiding out or have any further information on this case, you're asked to contact the FBI's Los Angeles field office at 310-477-6565. Viktor Vekselberg, a Ukrainian-Russian businessman who made his initial fortune by selling pieces of worn-out copper cable, is one of many Russian oligarchs who have sanctions placed against them following the invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces. The sanctions, which were announced in 2018, state that it's illegal for Vekselberg to operate in conjunction with U.S. financial businesses or within U.S. markets. But it's since been found out that he's ignored these laws with the aid of two men, one of which is still listed on the FBI's most wanted fugitives list. The other, a 52-year-old British man named Richard Masters, has been taken into custody and charged with the facilitation of a sanctions evasion and money laundering scheme that involved Vekselberg's luxury yacht, a 225-foot vessel named Tango, which is valued at $90 million. Masters was arrested in Madrid, Spain, after the FBI teamed up with Homeland Security, and it was hoped that once this was done, he would be extradited to face the consequences of his actions. It was discovered that Masters was the owner of a trading company in Majorca, and that he performed maintenance services on yachts as well as other seafaring vessels, including one owned by Vekselberg, which is in direct violation of the sanctions that have been placed against him. The other man involved in the case, and who is also on the FBI's most wanted list, is 51-year-old Vlad Osipov, a Russian-Swiss national who worked together with Masters in facilitating the operation of the luxury yacht by using U.S. companies as well as the United States financial system. They also did their utmost to hide the fact that the vessels belonged to Vekselberg, who is Osipov's employer since he's the property manager of the yacht. It was found that he went to extraordinary lengths to deceive the U.S. government, and hence he's being sought on multiple charges. Though he didn't hide the fact that Vekselberg designed the luxury yacht, he went to serious trouble to make it seem as though the vessel was only being used by Vekselberg for personal use, and that he was receiving no financial gain from it, which simply wasn't the case. One would imagine that Masters may have been unaware of the fact that the yacht belonged to Vekselberg, or that sanctions had been brought against him, but it's since been found that he took over management of the vessel right after the sanctions were announced. Furthermore, it's been found that he was fully aware of the sanctions, and that he then conspired with several other people to dodge them. First, he created a fake name for the yacht, changing it from Tango to the Fanta. This meant that any money paid to Vekselberg for the use of the yacht seemed to be related to the Fanta instead, and once the deception was discovered, it was found that hundreds of thousands of dollars had been paid in U.S. currency for the use of the Tango. Had it been known that the vessel in question was actually the Tango, these payments would have never been authorized, since it would have been apparent that the yacht belonged to Vekselberg. Since their payments were never disclosed to the Department of Treasury, it's considered fraud, and the penalty for these actions could be very severe. As for Osipov, he was found to have created an ownership structure of several shell companies in order to hide the fact that the yacht belonged to his employer. But the deception didn't end there, since Vekselberg still needed to make money by renting the yacht out, and hence they had to devise yet another plan. Employees working aboard the vessel were told to keep doing business with U.S. customers, but to hide the fact that it belonged to Vekselberg, since this would draw attention to the sanctions against him, likely resulting in many cancellations and huge losses in profits. To do this, they advised customers to pay for the use of the yacht in foreign currencies or through third parties. But it would then come to light that US-based companies were not only renting the yacht without knowledge of the sanctions, but that some had supplied many of the features that could be found on board. These included its internet connection, teleconferencing software, weather forecasting systems, computer systems, as well as its satellite TV service, and other luxury services that had to be paid for, further illegally lining Vekselberg's pockets. This meant that Vekselberg and his employees were still enjoying the benefits of the yacht being used, directly defying the sanctions that he was supposed to adhere to, since all of these services had been purchased illegally. In April of 2022, the Tango was frozen by Spanish authorities after they were made aware of the seizure warrant that had been granted by the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. The warrant stated that the yacht was in line for forfeiture since Vekselberg and his employees had committed fraud against the U.S., had laundered money, and had ignored sanctions that were in place. Initially, Osipov faced a total of 12 charges for his involvement in the scheme. But in February of 2024, it was announced that a new indictment had been reached and that he would now be facing an additional 5 charges, all related to the managing and operating of the yacht. The U.S. government has also announced that it would be seeking the return of all the funds collected by the 2 men, while the Tango was still illegally operating, and it's believed that this will total somewhere in the region of $707,000. But the case was dealt a setback when Spanish authorities announced that they would not be extraditing Masters as requested, since it was found that his dealings hadn't breached any Spanish laws, and hence his crimes didn't qualify him for extradition. For the time being, he remains under house arrest in Spain, and the Tango remains under seizure at the Club de Mar in Palma, but Osipov remains on the run as his current whereabouts remain unknown. The case against Osipov and Vekselberg is part of the klepto capture operation, which includes a task force that looks to enforce the sanctions that have been brought against several Russian figures in the wake of the Russian-Ukrainian war. In a bid to find Osipov as quickly as possible, the FBI has asked for the public's assistance in solving the case, and a $1 million reward is on offer for any information leading to his current whereabouts and his eventual capture, though it isn't known where he may be hiding out at present. If you have any information or could assist in bringing Osipov to justice, you're urged to contact the FBI via email at tips.fbi@fbi.gov. You can also visit your nearest FBI field office or American embassy, or submit a tip via WhatsApp using the phone number 763-443-8025. Illegally dealing with weapons is a serious crime that could see criminals face very lengthy jail sentences, but since it's an extremely lucrative trade, they're often prepared to take the chance of being captured, since they could stand to make huge profits if they manage to stay hidden from the law. This is seemingly what 2 men who are wanted by the FBI had in mind when they devised a scheme to illegally obtain and smuggle firearms from Cleveland to Lebanon between May of 2011 and September of 2014. The 2 men in question are 51-year-old Nakli Nader from Cleveland, who also goes by the alias of Mike, and 47-year-old George Ajeltuni, who lived in North Olmsted before he became a fugitive. The pair had a third accomplice, 48-year-old Jean Issa, who lived in Lebanon, but he's since been taken into custody after a red notice was issued by Interpol seeking his arrest. The 3 men were involved in a number of illegal activities, some of which included just Ajeltuni and Issa, another that was undertaken by Ajeltuni on his own, and another that pertained solely to Nader. While it's believed that Nader and Ajeltuni never worked together on any of their schemes, it's thought that they knew of each other's illegal activities, since they are acquaintances and they're currently hiding out somewhere in Lebanon. The details of Ajeltuni and Issa's crimes are rather complicated and well thought out, explaining why it took so long before their illegal activities came to light, and why they managed to make large profits like they did. Between 2011 and 2014, Ajeltuni and Issa constructed a plan to supply firearms to Lebanon after they were purchased in Cleveland. Al-Touni was the one who acquired the weapons from federal firearms dealers, as well as private individuals in Northeast Ohio and other areas of the country. He would also travel all over the US to attend firearm shows, where he would choose suitable weapons to purchase using cash to pay the former owners. But once this was done, the weapons still had to be smuggled out of the country. And to do this, the two men devised a clever scheme to avoid detection. Al-Touni proceeded to purchase used cars from private individuals in order to keep his tracks covered with as little paperwork as possible. Once the vehicles had been acquired, they would remove the door paneling and body paneling before placing the weapons inside and then replacing the panels to conceal them. Issa would then make his way from Lebanon to Cleveland, not only to help with the concealment, but to get the vehicles ready to be transported to Lebanon. This was done via ship to further minimize the chances of them being caught red-handed. Once the cars reached their intended destination, both men would be in Lebanon to receive them. The cars would then be taken apart again, and the weapons retrieved to be resold to the highest bidder. Both men made multiple trips between Cleveland and Beirut to ensure that the cargo arrived in time and to the correct buyer before they would start the whole operation over again, resulting in a lot of money lining their pockets. But this isn't the only charge that Al-Touni faces. He's also been charged with naturalization law after it was discovered that he'd illegally obtained naturalization and U.S. citizenship in 2009, despite not being eligible. Both Issa and Al-Touni face further charges of conspiracy to smuggle and illegally ship firearms, smuggling goods from the U.S., unlawful delivery of firearms to a common carrier, control of arms exports and imports, and unlicensed dealing in firearms. A long list of charges that could see them spending a significant amount of time behind bars. As for Nader, who's also still on the run from the FBI, he's charged with 4 counts of income tax evasion that's connected to several businesses that owned and ran between 2012 and 2015. 3 of those businesses are profitable liquor stores, all of which were registered in his name. But during this specific period, Nader withheld crucial information from his tax preparer, specifically dealing with extra money that he was making, debt forgiveness, and the fact that he used some of this money to pay for his own personal expenses. During this time, he withdrew money from his business bank accounts to pay his rent, make payments toward his vehicles, make mortgage payments. And while these seem like very important things to cover, there were also more frivolous purchases. These included paying for his parking, using the money to pay for dinners in expensive restaurants, paying his alimony, buying expensive items of clothing, and purchasing extravagant pieces of jewelry, to name but a few of the transactions. Surprisingly, Nader agreed to an interview with the media outlet after it came to light that he was being sought by the FBI, and he stated that the allegations against him were completely false, since he's innocent. He added that his crimes were being mixed up with the crimes that Issa and Al-Touni had committed, and that the FBI's insistence that he's guilty is nothing more than character assassination, though he's failed to provide any proof as to why this would be the case. He alleges that the charges against him stem from his political views and from a conversation that he had with a lobbyist back in 2011 in Beverly Hills. During one conversation while they were having coffee, Nader made mention of a certain organization that was contrary to the lobbyist's beliefs. Soon after that encounter, he was pulled over by police officers and given a ticket, and since then, he's believed that he's been on some kind of government watch list, and that the charges against him have been fabricated to remove him from society. He believes that the lobbyist who he met with became offended at his political views, and that they had something to do with him being placed on the FBI's most wanted list, though once again he's failed to provide any proof for these statements. While Nader and Al-Touni aren't wanted for the same crimes, it's believed that they could be hiding out together, or at the very least, that each of the men knows where the other is, and if one of them is caught, it's thought that they might reveal the other's location, and they can then finally be taken into custody and serve whatever jail time they're given. If you have any information that could lead to either Nader or Al-Touni's arrest, you're asked to contact the FBI tip line at 1-800-225-5324. You're free to remain anonymous if you choose to do so. It seems that wherever we go today, we need to be on the lookout for fraudsters and scammers who do their level best to steal money that they haven't earned, either by promising certain goods and services or by promising a huge return on investments. The The problem with these kinds of criminals is that they're very hard to spot, since they're usually very gifted at convincing their victims that everything they do is completely legal and above the board. Once their deception comes to light, it's too late and their victim is left to deal with the fallout. These scams aren't always carried out face-to-face, but could take all kinds of forms, including email, text, via online selling platforms, or through spurious advertising campaigns that look too good to be true and turn out to be exactly that. We all know someone who's fallen victim to one of these scams, and in most cases, the financial damage done isn't too bad. But there are some cases that go to the extreme, as is evidenced by the illegal dealings that were performed by a 36-year-old man named Ishmael Shalash. Shalash is a foreign national who has dual citizenship in Jordan and Palestine, and who lived in Cincinnati until it was announced that he'd been added to the FBI's most wanted list in September of 2021. He's now been on the run ever since, and his current whereabouts remain unknown. He's accused of using the Hard Rock Casino in Cincinnati to launder money that he'd obtained illegally, and then allowing his wife to use that money to finance her extravagant lifestyle. The scam that Shalash used to obtain this money is a strange one that saw several luxury car dealerships lose a lot of money after they never received what he had promised them. It's alleged that Shalash would contact these luxury car dealerships and discuss selling a vehicle to them. Once an agreement had been reached, the dealership would pay for the car and await delivery. But Shalash would never arrive and would then become uncontactable, vanishing with the money as quickly as he could. He would also travel to several different states while carrying out his nefarious plans to ensure that it would be much harder for the scams to be connected to him. Once he'd received the money and fled, he would then launder the money through the Hard Rock Casino to cover his tracks. When it became obvious that he was responsible for these scams, authorities took a closer look at his bank accounts and were surprised to find a pattern. As soon as the money had been transferred from a dealership to his account, he would almost immediately start making unusually large withdrawals. This money was then transferred to the casino, and he would later retrieve it in the form of credits. It's believed that he attempted to scam at least 8 people in 5 different states, and if he'd been successful, they would have lost a total of $3.48 million. As for the victims that he did manage to defraud, there were a total of 5 in 4 different states, and they lost a combined $1.77 million. To keep his real identity a secret and to further gain his victims' trust, he would often tell them that his name was Armand Barragante, and that he represented MDDI Inc. When the Hard Rock Casino's financial reports were checked, it was found that Shalash had deposited as much as $464,700 and cashed out a total of $789,500 between the 24th of May, 2021 and the 24th of August that same year. He also deposited an undisclosed amount of money to be used at the casino in the future, but this total has not been made public. The casino would eventually notice suspicious activity on his account, and it would then come to light that he was using that account to transfer the money that he had stolen from his victims, effectively making him a money launderer. As soon as all of this illegal activity was discovered, a federal arrest warrant was issued for Shalash's arrest in September of 2021. But by this time, he and his wife, Abir Mulawa, who hailed from Houston, Texas, and whom he'd married just a short time prior, had fled to Morocco to evade capture. It was later discovered that Shalash and Mulawa had gotten to know each other via Facebook, and after she flew to Cincinnati to meet him in person, they decided to get married right away. But as soon as the couple became aware of the fact that the long arm of the law was closing in on Shalash, he quickly emptied his bank accounts with the use of cashier's checks, totaling about $500,000. Following this, his new wife opened a safety deposit box at a PNC bank in Houston, and it's been suggested that she did so in order to hide the large amounts of money that her husband had stolen from his unsuspecting victims. The FBI then got word that Mulawa had been making plans to return to the US so that she could salvage the money that had been left at the bank. This information proved to be correct, and it was later found out that after she'd arrived in Houston in November, she went on an extravagant shopping spree that included buying mostly expensive clothing that she planned to take back to Morocco with her. Shortly after her arrival, a search warrant was granted, and the safety deposit box was found to still contain about $300,000. As she was about to get back on a plane to Morocco, She was confronted by investigators, but she denied their allegations. But while she was on a phone call, agents were able to see her phone screen and noticed she was talking to a contact named Ish, likely short for Ishmael, her new husband. They were also able to catch some of the conversation and realized that she was talking about money and Morocco. She also told the person she was talking to that she should have never married them. She was then formally interviewed by FBI agents in hopes that they would be able to glean further information from her. But she stated that she and Shalash were no longer married and that she had no idea where he had relocated to after they left the United States. She added that she'd not spoken to him for 2 months and had no intention of contacting him again. She was then placed under arrest and charged with conspiracy to defraud the U.S., making false statements and laundering of money instruments. Though it's almost certain that Mulawa does know where Shalash is hiding out, she'll likely never reveal his whereabouts, and the FBI has released details of the crime in case a member of the public is able to assist in tracking him down. Shalash is described as having brown eyes, standing 6 feet tall, and weighing around 215 pounds. If you have any useful information on this case, you're urged to contact your nearest FBI field office or American embassy. Between 2004 and 2006, husband and wife Victor and Natalia Wolf lived in Sunny Isles Beach, Florida, in an area that contains many Russian nationals, and the couple fit in perfectly since they originally hailed from Russia. According to the couple, they'd been living in Germany prior to moving to the United States in 2000. But it soon became apparent to those living around them that they were well off, and the following year they took out a loan of $667,000 to buy a mansion in Florida. Not only did they own a stately home, they also drove expensive cars, decorated their home with marble statues, and adorned themselves with expensive pieces of jewelry. And soon, they decided to start a real estate business called Sky Group Realty. Once they had lined up potential investors, their clients would be flown in and out of Florida on a private plane. And as their business started to grow, they branched out into the construction industry, creating a subsidiary company called Sky Development Group. They focused their attention on Citrus Springs, since this area had great potential for further development, and soon they gained a reputation as being genuinely interested in developing that community, and since they were a married couple, they seemed trustworthy. They soon became accepted members of the community, and they could often be seen attending fairs in the area, sometimes even sponsoring some of the stands. But little did their newfound friend know that this was all a ruse. All the while, the couple's business began to flourish, and soon they had plenty of clients who were looking to buy or sell a house. But they had dreams of bigger things, and in 2004, they announced that they would be using their second company to build 50 houses in the Citrus Springs area. But to do so, they would need a few investors, and it wouldn't take long until they had what they asked for. Realizing that Citrus Springs would soon be a bustling community with great potential, clients started buying plots of land at extortionate prices, some selling for as much as $35,000 when they were available for just $4,000 a few months earlier. Their real estate company had grown so large that they could now afford to advertise on TV, bringing in even more investors that by this point had parted with millions of dollars. But while everything seemed on the up and up to the Citrus Springs community and the couple's investors, the Wolfs had actually been using homes that they'd already sold to obtain millions more in loans. But they could only keep the wool pulled over the bank's eyes for so long, and as soon as their finances were scrutinized a little more closely, it became apparent that they didn't own nearly as many properties as they claimed to, and some of the lots that they'd used as collateral were found to belong to other people. Furthermore, it was discovered that they were using money from investors and loans to further enhance their lavish lifestyle. When they were asked to provide proof of ownership of these lots, they were unable to do so. And where they had usually just repaid the loans, they were now unable to do so since they had taken out millions of dollars. An investigation into their shady dealings was launched, and after it was discovered that neither of their companies had been registered, they were ordered to either repay all of the money that they had acquired or take their chances in court. But after promising to repay the money, they merely continued with business as usual, and inexplicably, no one ever followed up on their promise. Instead, they started raking in even more money and continued hosting lavish parties that were attended by fellow millionaires, who also soon invested in their illegal companies. To make matters worse, some people who had bought plots from the couple could only do so after they had taken out loans themselves, some of which totaled in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. They would wait patiently for the deed to their new property to arrive, only to realize that they'd been swindled out of their money and left to repay a loan that was now lining the Wolf's pockets. By now, the couple had created dozens of shell companies, and plots of land had been sold to multiple people. And when their clients began to catch on, they provided them with deeds at last, but of course they were complete forgeries. But after spending 2 years falsifying documents and giving investors the runaround, things began to turn sour for the couple. Where most criminals would pack up the millions that they'd stolen and go on the run, the Wolves decided to expand their operations, hoping to make as much money as they could before they were caught. They expanded their operations to other areas of Florida and into Texas, creating more subsidiary companies and promising the development of other rural areas. Again, they started raking in millions of dollars, but by 2006, one of their employees started getting suspicious after he found that they were laundering some of the money they had received. It seemed to those around them that the couple had fallen on hard times as they were selling many of their properties and taking out more loans to keep their company afloat. And when a government clerk noticed that one of the properties that had been sold to a client actually belonged to someone else, it became apparent that they were a couple of fraudsters. Dissatisfied clients started contacting the authorities and reporting that loans were being taken out by the Wolves on properties that had already been sold. And try as they might, they were unable to get a hold of them to discuss the situation. They even went as far as borrowing money from a close friend, Peter Madison, who had already invested millions of dollars. But he saw the loans as a protection of his investment, and he agreed to fork over a further $100,000, but he would never see or hear from the couple again. Deciding to investigate, police officers went to the couple's office, but they found that the building had been ransacked. Hard drives had been removed from the computers and paperwork had been scattered across the floor, but the Wolves were nowhere to be found. At their mansion, things were found in a similar state, with some of the couple's clothes missing, and the rest of the house in a state that suggested they'd fled in a hurry. It was now certain that the Wolves had decided to go on the run with millions of dollars in their pockets. Despite the best efforts of investigators to track them down, the couple has not been seen or heard from since, and it's believed that they fled to Russia, where they're still hiding out. They were added to the FBI's most wanted list in 2011, after they were charged with conspiracy to commit mail fraud and wire fraud. Anyone who has information on the case is urged to contact their local FBI office or their nearest American embassy. Kidnapping is a crime that's usually carried out in order to gain ransom money from people who are close to the victim. And in many of these cases, the kidnapper will allow their victim to go free after they've received their ill-gotten gains. People who are targeted are often from wealthy families or have ties to large, prosperous companies that are willing to pay the ransom in order to ensure the safety of the person that's been abducted. In some rare cases, abductors will go back on their word and either keep the abductee until even more money is paid or do away with the victim after the fact out of fear that they'll go to the police with a description of the criminal. There have also been many instances where the police were never contacted, since the abductor threatened to harm the victim if this was done, and in these cases, it rarely ends well for anyone but the criminal. Usually, only one victim is taken, held for a certain period of time until the money is paid and then released. But there are some cases where multiple people have been abducted at the same time, which was the case in Haiti in 2021. In October of that year, 16 US citizens and 1 Canadian citizen were in Port-au-Prince, where they were working as Christian missionaries when they became the victims of a mass kidnapping that was carried out by 2 well-known gangs. Now, fair warning, I have no clue how to pronounce the names of these gangs, but the gangs seem to go by the names of 400 Mawozo and Crazy Barry, respectively. I'm confident that this pronunciation is wrong, but there isn't really an official pronunciation available. But after the abductions were carried out, the 400 Mawozo gang claimed responsibility, adding that they'd been aided by the leaders of Crazy Barry. The group of missionaries, which hails from Ohio's Christian Aid Ministries, had just finished a visit to a local orphanage when they were approached by gang members and forcefully abducted after having firearms pointed at them. What followed could only have been a harrowing experience for the abductees, as they were held for the next 61 days, and the gang members demanded that $17 million ransom be paid by Haitian authorities before they would be released. $1 million for each of the people that were being held. Haitian police were able to make contact with the missionary group, and they were given advice on how to handle the situation that they found themselves in. Since American citizens were involved, the FBI soon stepped in to help, but they were only assisting in the investigation rather than leading it. This was hardly an isolated case, as Haiti had become infamous for kidnappings that were being carried out by various gangs, and authorities have stated that the country's economic decline, corruption, and state of political turmoil have played major parts in the rise of these types of crimes. A report that was released by the United Nations estimated that as much as 60% of Port-au-Prince was being controlled by gangs at the time, and this number was predicted to rise exponentially as these gangs continued to wreak havoc on the area in a bid to gain even more control. During negotiations between Haitian authorities and gang leaders, more demands were added when the group insisted that one of their leaders be released from prison, as he'd been incarcerated for similar crimes along with Jean Embry, who also served as a gang leader. It soon came to light that the leader had been in constant contact with the gang while in prison, directing them on how to approach the ongoing negotiations. Roughly a month after the missionaries had been abducted, part of the ransom was paid, and 2 of the hostages were set free. 2 weeks later, more money was paid, and a further 3 of the hostages were released. On the 16th of December, all of the remaining hostages managed to escape their captors, though it's not been made public how they were able to do so, or if they had any assistance in fleeing to safety. The crime resulted in charges being brought against 3 of the gang leaders who were involved in the crime, namely 29-year-old Lanmo Sanju, who also goes by the alias Joseph Wilson, 28-year-old Jermaine Stevenson, both of whom served as the leader for the 400 Mawozo gang, and the 36-year-old leader of the Crazy Berry gang. A $3 million reward was offered for information on these men's whereabouts, $1 million for each of the gang leaders. Members of the public have been warned not to approach any of these men for any reason, as they're considered to be armed and dangerous. Instead, anyone who spots any of these individuals or has information on this case should contact their nearest FBI office or American embassy. Every so often, we hear reports on the news of fugitives that have escaped from prison, and usually this causes a lot of anxiety in the surrounding community, since many prisoners are considered to be dangerous to society. In most cases, the fugitives are rounded up fairly quickly by the police, since news of the escape usually spreads very quickly, and descriptions of the escapees are made public in case someone spots them while they're fleeing. But there are also some rare cases where prisoners escape and manage to evade the long arm of the law, possibly making it to a country where they cannot be extradited, or by altering their appearance so drastically that they can't be recognized. Sometimes a group of inmates escape together, after which they split up, but when one of the fugitives is caught, they often reveal the whereabouts of their fellow escapees. But this was not the case in December of 2022, when 2 men escaped from the Cass County Jail. The 2 inmates in question were 43-year-old Sergio Perez Martinez, who hails from California, and 33-year-old Trevor Scott Sparks from Kansas City. Perez was doing time after being found guilty of possessing an illegal substance and conspiracy to commit money laundering, while Sparks had a much lengthier and more complicated charge sheet. He was found guilty of conspiracy to distribute an illegal substance, being part of a money laundering conspiracy, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. But Sparks had also been involved in other illegal activities. Before his arrest, he'd been running a $4.1 million illegal substance operation, which allowed him to distribute over 1,000 pounds of the substance over a 2-year period to areas that included Kansas City, Springfield, St. Joseph, and St. Louis. As is usually the case with these types of operations, it's also been linked to other crimes, one of which involved a man named James Hampton. Members of Sparks' operation believed that Hampton had stolen cash and some of the illegal substances from his fellow criminals, and in order to get the information out of him, he was abducted in St. Louis. But they soon realized after questioning him that he didn't have the information they wanted, and so he was tied up and assaulted. He was then loaded into the trunk of a car and driven to Kansas City, along with a woman named Brittany Broyles, who had witnessed the interrogation. Both Hampton and Broyles were later found deceased in Bates City and Kansas City, respectively. A further 31 people were arrested in connection to these crimes, all of whom pleaded guilty to their respective charges. Sparks was sent to the Cass County Prison, where he ended up meeting Perez Martinez, and together the two men hatched a plan to make their escape. But they knew they would need help from the outside, and so Sparks started making some phone calls. He got in touch with his mother, 54-year-old Dawn Brandstetter, who was living in Blue Springs, Missouri, and they had several conversations about his and Perez Martinez's plans to break out of prison. During one of the calls, he could be heard telling his mother to make sure that she had a lot of gas in her car, since she would have to come and pick him up very soon, and that she should prepare herself for when the time comes. When the time for the escape drew near, Sparks attempted to contact his mother once more to finalize the plan, but she wasn't answering her phone, and instead he got in touch with 64-year-old Stephen Liddell Williams Sr. Sparks asked Williams to get in touch with Brandstetter since their plans had been finalized, but when Williams attempted to do so, she once again didn't answer the phone, this time for days on end. Sparks knew he had come up with an alternative plan, and he decided to recruit Williams as a getaway driver. On the 5th of December, both Sparks and Perez Martinez managed to make it out of prison undetected, and they were picked up by Williams at a Casey's store, after which they fled. Back at the prison, it would only be during breakfast that guards noticed the two men were missing, and the chances of them being apprehended were dwindling, since they'd already had a 7-hour head start. 4 days later, investigators traveled to Branstetter's home, where she was interviewed about the escape and the conversations that she had with Sparks. But she stated that she wouldn't reveal her son's whereabouts, and that she would gladly go to prison as long as he stayed free. Her husband was also questioned, but he refused to cooperate with investigators, and the two fugitives remained on the run for the time being. They then decided to take a look at her cell phone, and they were surprised at what they found. They noticed that 38-year-old Nicholas Paris, Sparks' sister's ex-boyfriend, had been in communication with Brandstetter, and in their messages, they were discussing a visit to Texas, where Sparks' sister lived. What made the messages strange was that Brandstetter and Paris hadn't messaged each other much, but immediately after Sparks escaped from prison, they were in constant contact with each other. But they couldn't learn much from the messages, since they were written vaguely, and some of their communications took place via voice and video calls. But on the 30th of December, Sparks was spotted as he left the back of a house in Blue Springs, where his mother had been seen on multiple occasions. The two got into a car, after which they traveled to Paris's house, where all three were finally taken into custody. Sparks had finally been caught, but Perez Martinez was still on the run, and investigators had no leads on his whereabouts, and he remains a fugitive today. Perez Martinez is described as having black hair and brown eyes. He stands 5 foot 7 inches tall and weighs around 130 pounds. He's also noted as having a scar on the left side of his face, which could help in identifying him. He also has multiple tattoos, one on the back of his neck, another on his left forearm, and a third on his back. A reward of $5,000 has been offered to anyone with information leading to Perez Martinez's whereabouts. But in order to qualify for the reward, you must contact the U.S. Marshals Service by dialing 816-512-2000. Alternatively, if you have information that could prove to be useful, you can contact the FBI at 800-225-5324, or go to tips.fbi.gov to submit a tip anonymously. Anyone who comes across Perez Martinez should not approach him, as he's considered to be armed and dangerous, and instead you should get in contact with law enforcement as soon as possible. Perez Martinez remains on the FBI's most wanted list for the time being, and he's likely to remain there until he's apprehended. Many criminals make their living by participating in the massive trades of firearms smuggling operations, despite it being known that it destroys the lives of thousands of people all over the world every year. These weapons are often sent to areas where there's an ongoing military conflict, or to gangs that are known to control areas of their communities, where they're used to further spread fear and violence. But it remains a popular activity among criminals, as it's a very lucrative trade, even though once caught, these criminals usually receive very long prison sentences, with some never seeing the outside world again. But in many of these cases, the distributors of these weapons are never caught, since any evidence, such as serial numbers linking the distributor to the weapons, is quickly removed and the weapons could be sent to different parts of the world. This was not the case with two men who were smuggling weapons out of Cleveland, as they have been identified, but two of the three remain on the run, and the FBI has released details surrounding their crimes. 47-year-old George Ageltowney and 51-year-old Nakli Nader are accused of running an illegal firearms smuggling operation that supplied weapons to fellow criminals in Lebanon. A third man, Jean Youssef Issa, has also been mentioned in the case, but he's been located and taken into custody after Interpol issued a red notice, which is always sent out worldwide. As for the two men who remain on the run, it's alleged that they used some very clever tactics to get the hundreds of weapons out of the country, and it's believed that they've been doing so for at least 3 years. Nader is accused of the same charges as Ageltowney, but it's believed that they ran separate operations with the same goal in mind, and it's known that the two men have known each other for some time. After arriving in Cleveland, Ageltowney bought a business called Giorgio's Pizza, which is located on Denison Avenue. He was also known to be an avid volleyball player, and at one point he served as a bodyguard to Gibran Bassil, who's the leader of the largest Christian political party in Lebanon. He's also the son-in-law of the country's president, Mitchell Aoun. It's also been noted that in 2012, he gave a speech at a reception in Bassil's honor that was held at a restaurant in downtown Cleveland. Nader, on the other hand, owned Mr. C's Food Mart on Shaw Avenue, Mr. C's 2 on Superior Avenue, and Bank Street Wine and Spirits on West 6th Street. All three of these businesses were raided by the FBI and IRS in 2017 as part of their ongoing investigations. It's known that Issa and Ageltowney worked together on the scheme that they ran for years, and they managed to avoid suspicion by being very careful about how they went about their business. From May of 2011 to September of 2014, Ageltowney would contact federal arms dealers and private arms dealers, after which he would acquire as many weapons as he could, so that they could be smuggled to Lebanon, where they were sold for a hefty profit. Most of the weapons were acquired in Northeast Ohio, but it's believed that many more were purchased in other areas. Ageltowney would also often attend weapons exhibitions, during which he would make contact with the owners of the weapons, and he would then offer cash payments to acquire as many weapons as he could. But this was only the first part of the scheme, as the two men still had to figure out a way to smuggle the weapons out of the United States, something that's not usually done easily. And so they came up with a clever plan that would not only hide the weapons, but ensure that they were nowhere near them in case they were found. Ageltowney made contact with individuals who were selling their cars, once again offering them cash in order to expedite the sale. Once he had taken possession of the vehicles, he would hide the weapons on the inside of the vehicle's panels and doors, where they were least likely to be detected. Issa was still in Lebanon at this stage, but he then traveled to Ohio to aid Ageltowney in concealing the weapons. After this was done, the cars were loaded onto a ship that was headed to Lebanon, and upon arrival there, the weapons would be removed and sold. But to ensure that the weapons made it to their intended destination, both Ageltowney and Issa would travel to Beirut, where most of the weapons ultimately ended up. Once the weapons had been removed, the vehicles would be resold for a further profit, but these aren't the only crimes that the two men are accused of. Ageltowney has also been charged with neutralization fraud after he had fraudulently acquired naturalization and U.S. citizenship that he was not eligible for, since he was a lawful permanent resident but was not eligible for full citizenship. Furthermore, Nader is being sought on additional charges that include 4 counts of tax evasion that occurred while he ran a number of businesses between 2012 and 2015. It's alleged that Nader bought 3 liquor stores in the area, but he then used funds from these businesses to pay for personal expenses, and he failed to include information on additional sources of income and debt forgiveness. Included in the payments of personal expenses are Nader's mortgage payments, rent payments, parking expenses, alimony payments, and travel expenses, and it's believed that he also used these funds to buy expensive clothing and jewelry, and to fund dinners at expensive restaurants. The exact whereabouts of these two criminals aren't known at present, but investigators believe that they will be traveling together and that they may be living in Batron, Lebanon. Ageltowney remains on the run, and the FBI has released images and a description in hopes that he will be recognized and brought to justice. He's described as having brown eyes and brown hair. He stands approximately 6 foot 1 inches tall and weighs around 186 pounds. He can also be identified by tattoos that he has on both arms, though it's not been mentioned what the tattoos depict. It's possible that Ajel Townie may travel to France or Cyprus, and he's known to speak English, French, as well as Arabic. Anyone who has information on his current whereabouts or has any further information on Ajel Townie's case is urged to contact the FBI at 1-800-225-5324. Usually, when a criminal is forced to go on the run, they end up living in less than ideal conditions, since venturing out into the public eye could result in them being recognized and ultimately apprehended by the police. But this isn't always the case, as some criminals manage to evade the law with their ill-gotten gains still intact. And if they manage to escape to a foreign country, they may be able to use that money to fund their lifestyle, as they'd planned in the first place. This is seemingly the case with wanted fugitive Yevgeny Polyanin, an alleged Russian super hacker that's been added to the FBI's most wanted list for his involvement in a money laundering scheme and a series of ransomware attacks that affected computers around the world. Polyanin was a member of a group of hackers known as Revil, and it's believed that at one point he worked with another hacker, Yaroslav Vasinsky, who hails from Ukraine. It's alleged that Vasinsky used the Revil ransomware program to target a software company named Kaseya, which is based in Florida. But the attack soon spread, and before it could be contained, up to 1,500 businesses around the world had been affected. The same program was also used in an attack on JBSSA, a company based in Brazil, and the result was that that company had to close 5 of its plants for a short period, causing massive production disruptions of beef in America. Following these attacks, the 2 hackers were charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Vasinsky was eventually released after he was spotted attempting to cross the border into Ukraine, and is currently incarcerated in Poland, after he was charged with 11 different charges relating to the attacks. However, his accomplice, Polyanin, has managed to evade the law and he remains on the run. Polyanin, who goes by the aliases of Prof. Comserve, Yarek45, and Yaroslav 2468, has had $6.1 million of the money that he pilfered from his victims seized by the Department of Justice. And he's also been accused of carrying out ransomware attacks on various victim organizations based in the US. The attacks were carried out using ransomware programs, during which Polyanin would leave text files on his victims' computers. The victims would then be unable to access their own files until a ransom was paid. The text file would direct them to certain websites where they could be informed of the amount that they needed to pay in order to gain control of their computers again. They would also be given a virtual currency address where the ransom could be paid, and once this was done, Polyanin would provide them with the ransomware program's decryption key, after which the victim would regain access to their files. But if this victim was unable or unwilling to pay the requested amount, Polyanin would threaten to publish their information, such as passwords, bank account numbers, and phone numbers online. In some cases, he would sell this information to third parties who would then use it as they saw fit. When Polyanin was identified as one of the hackers, he was added to the FBI's most wanted list, and he remains on the run today. But his whereabouts are known, and he's living a surprisingly luxurious lifestyle while being a wanted man. It was discovered that he's living in Russia, where he purchased a house valued at around $380,000. Added to this is the fact that he's driving a Toyota Land Cruiser 200, which is valued at $74,000, and he has a second vehicle, a BMW valued at around $108,000. Seemingly unaffected by his wanted status in the US, his wife, Sophia, is known to run a social media baking company that's known to cater to all kinds of events, including parties that often order specialized baking items. Since it was discovered that he and his wife live in the luxury mansion, reporters have been seen waiting outside the residence in hopes that they can capture an image of the hacker. But he and Sophia have kept the house's curtains drawn, and they're reported to not be answering their phone. He has stated that he's not interested in talking to everyone, and according to some reports, he's told his mother, Svetlana, that he's done nothing wrong and that the charges that he's being accused of have been made up. During an interview with Svetlana, she stated that she's growing ever more concerned over her son being a wanted man, and that she's struggled to maintain contact with him since the charges have come to light. She's insisted that he's not, in fact, a programmer, but she is uncertain whether the charges that have been brought against him are true. He did, however, contact her almost a week after the charges were made public, and told her that he was currently on a holiday, adding that there's no truth to the allegations against him. Soon after Polyannon's crimes were uncovered, his sister Anna was contacted by mutual friends who wanted to find out if the story was indeed true. But she stated that her family was in no way connected to the Russian government or any media outlets. When a reporter requested that she meet with him to discuss the case, she refused, and neither Anna nor any of the members of the Polyannon family seemingly want anything to do with the case that's been covered by media outlets around the world. One of Polyannon's neighbors who was interviewed by the media stated that the case was well known in the area, and that people were not at all surprised to learn that Polyannon had been involved in the ransomware attacks, but they refused to give further comment. Polyannon's crimes are more far-reaching than he could have ever envisioned, as both US President Joe Biden and Russian leader Vladimir Putin have had discussions about this and other attacks that have been carried out globally and in the United States. He stated that when he met with Putin in June of 2021, he reiterated that the government would take steps to ensure that cyber criminals are brought to justice for their crimes, and he cited the fact that Polyannon is now a wanted man to be one of the steps that's being taken. Many analysts have stated that Russia's actions against Polyannon and fellow hackers will be seen as a test of whether Putin intends to assist in the capture of these criminals, and that if he refuses to intervene, it'll be seen as a sign that he's unwilling to cooperate. Polyannon is currently living a life of luxury thanks to his criminal tendencies, but all the while, his mother lives in a government-built block of flats, with the only expensive item in her possession being an iPhone 8. Polyannon and Sophia, however, have been seen taking expensive helicopter rides while on holiday, and his house contains a facade that's been coated in ceramic granite. Only time will tell how Polyannon will get away with his crimes, and whether he'll ever admit to committing them. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.